The air in the old Victorian house on Elm Street was thick and heavy, a stifling cocktail of lemon-scented polish, the faint, sweet decay of long-forgotten roses in the wallpaper, and the sharp, cold tension of a family coming undone. It was the last Saturday in October, and a premature dusk was settling over Havenwood, Massachusetts, the kind that leached the color from the world and left everything in shades of bruised purple and gray. Inside the library, the only light came from a single green-shaded banker's lamp on the vast mahogany desk, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Arthur Finch, the patriarch, was a silhouette against the large bay window, his broad shoulders slightly stooped, his hands, once capable of calming a spooked horse, now trembling as they clutched the back of his leather chair. He was 82 years old, and the weight of his years felt as tangible in the room as the smell of old books and dust. His 3 children were arranged before him like mismatched pieces of a puzzle that would never again fit together. To his left, leaning against the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with legal tomes, was Michael, the eldest. At 55, he had inherited his father's height and his stern jaw, but not his patience. He kept glancing at his watch, a heavy, expensive thing that gleamed in the lamplight. The soft tick, tick, tick was an audible measure of his irritation, each second a grain of sand falling in an hourglass of impending conflict. His suit, a charcoal gray, was too formal for a family gathering, a deliberate armor. Across from him, perched on the very edge of a worn velvet ottoman, was Claire. At 52, she had her mother's gentle eyes, but tonight they were red-rimmed and swimming in unshed tears. She twisted a damp, shredded tissue in her lap, the tiny, tearing sounds a counterpoint to Michael's ticking watch. She could still smell the scent of her father's cologne on the sweater she'd borrowed from the hallway closet, a ghost of comfort that offered none. And then there was Sarah, the youngest at 48. She stood apart, by the cold, dark fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wore faded jeans and a soft flannel shirt, her hands still bearing the faint stains of oil paint from her studio. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one who had always felt like a stranger in this house of rules and legacies. The air around her felt different, charged with a defensive energy that was almost electric. Arthur cleared his throat, the sound like gravel shifting. "Your mother," he began, his voice a low rumble that held a lifetime of authority, and a new, unsettling fragility. "Lillian, she was the best of us. She held this family together. She was the glue." He paused, and the house seemed to lean in, listening. The wind picked up outside, whistling a lonely tune through a crack in the window frame. "And now that she's gone, it falls to me to do the hard thing. To divide what we built." Michael shifted his weight, the fine leather of his shoes creaking. "We understand, Dad. We're all adults here. We just need to be practical." "Practical," Sarah echoed, the word a quiet, sharp dart. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Claire flinched as if struck. "Please, not today. Can we just get through this without fighting?" Arthur's hand came down on the desk, not with a slam, but with a definitive, heavy thud that made the lamp shudder. "There will be no fighting. This is my final word. The estate, the trusts, the investments, after the bequests to the Historical Society and the hospital, the remainder will be divided." He took a slow, measured breath, the air hissing between his teeth. "Michael, as the eldest and the one who has shouldered the most responsibility with the family's various holdings, you will receive 50%. The number hung in the air, vast and disproportionate. Michael's face remained a careful, neutral mask, but a subtle relaxation in his shoulders betrayed his satisfaction. "Claire," Arthur continued, his voice softening as he looked at his daughter, "you have always been the heart of this family. You cared for your mother in her final years with a saint's patience. You will receive 30%. It should be more than enough to secure your future, and for your boy, Ethan, to go to any college he chooses." A small, choked sob escaped Claire's lips. It was not a sound of joy, but of relief so profound it was almost painful. She nodded, unable to speak, the shredded tissue now a tiny, damp ball in her fist. Arthur's gaze then traveled to Sarah, standing defiantly by the cold hearth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another few degrees. "Sarah," he said, and his voice lost all its softness, becoming flinty and hard. "You chose your own path. You left. You pursued your art. You never showed interest in the family's stability, in its legacy. You will receive 20%. Consider it a final gesture to help you find your footing." Silence. It was a thick, smothering blanket. Sarah didn't move, but her knuckles, where she gripped her own elbows, were white. The unfairness of it was a physical taste in her mouth, metallic and sour. 20%. It was a dismissal. A punishment for not being Michael, for not being Claire, for being herself. 20%, she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. "After a lifetime of being treated like the second-class citizen. The disappointment." "It's not about that, Sarah," Michael cut in, his tone dripping with condescension. It's about stewardship. It's about who has proven they can manage wealth responsibly. You live in a converted garage, for God's sake. That converted garage is my home. It's where I create things. Something you wouldn't understand, you who only knows how to move numbers from one column to another. Sarah's voice rose, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Stop it. Both of you. Claire cried out, her voice breaking. This is what Mom would have hated. She hated this bickering over money. This isn't bickering, Claire, Michael said coldly. This is business. And Dad is right. You made your choices, Sarah. Choices have consequences. Consequences? Sarah laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. The consequence of not wanting to be a carbon copy of you? The consequence of having a soul? You think you deserve more because you spent your life brown-nosing clients and playing golf with people you despise? You're a ghost in a suit, Michael. And you, she turned her fiery gaze to her father, who had gone pale, you're rewarding him for it. You're punishing me for being alive. Arthur's face tightened, a network of fine lines deepening into crevices of anger and pain. That is enough, Sarah. The decision is made. The papers are with Mr. Sterling. He will handle the transfers on Monday. Of course he will, Sarah spat. She uncrossed her arms, her body trembling with a rage so pure it felt holy. You can keep your blood money. All of you. I don't want it. I don't want any part of this cold, heartless family. You can all rot in this mausoleum together. And with that, she turned and walked out of the library. Her footsteps on the polished hardwood floor were swift and sure, a staccato beat of finality. The front door opened, and a gust of cold, damp autumn air swept into the house, carrying the smell of wet leaves and ending. Then the door slammed shut, a sound like a gunshot that reverberated through every room, through every heart left behind. In the sudden, ringing quiet, Claire began to weep in earnest, soft, helpless sounds. Michael let out a long, weary sigh, as if he were the one who had been wronged. Arthur slowly, painfully, lowered himself into his chair, the leather sighing under his weight. The green lamp illuminated only the three of them now, a broken tableau in a pool of light, surrounded by the pressing, judgmental dark. The family, for all practical purposes, was over. The weeks that followed Sarah's departure were a study in frost. November arrived, stripping the remaining golden leaves from the oaks on Elm Street and replacing them with skeletal fingers scratching at a leaden sky. Inside the Finch house, the cold was more than meteorological, it was a presence, a permanent resident that had settled into the very bones of the building. Michael, true to his nature, dealt with the estrangement by burying himself in work. His law firm, Sterling & Finch, became his sanctuary. The world there was orderly, governed by statutes and precedents, a stark contrast to the messy, emotional wreckage of his family. He spent long hours in his corner office on the 20th floor, the city lights sprawling below him like a bed of distant, cold jewels. The silence in his apartment later was a hollow echo, broken only by the clink of a single glass of scotch. He told himself he had done the right thing, the logical thing. He was the heir, the steward. The weight of the family's future was on his shoulders. Sarah's dramatics were just that, dramatics. She would come around when she needed the money. They always did. But sometimes, in the dead of night, a sliver of doubt would worm its way in, a memory of a little sister with paint-smudged cheeks showing him a picture she'd drawn, her eyes shining with pride. He would push it away, a troublesome thought best left unexamined. Claire, meanwhile, was adrift in a sea of quiet grief. Her own modest home, usually a haven of baking smells and the soft hum of the television, felt cavernous and empty. Her son, Ethan, was away at his first semester of college, and the silence there was a different kind, filled with the ghost of his laughter, the absence of his sprawling backpack in the hallway. The inheritance money sat in her bank account, a large, cold number that felt tainted. She had tried to call Sarah dozens of times, her finger hovering over the contact photo of her sister, a sunny picture from a long-ago beach vacation. Each time, the call went straight to voicemail, Sarah's cheerful, recorded voice a cruel mockery. "Hey, it's Sarah. You know what to do." Claire would always hang up without leaving a message, her courage failing her. The money was supposed to be a blessing, a security for her and Ethan. Instead, it felt like a wall, thick and impenetrable, built with bricks of guilt and sealed with the mortar of her silence. She visited her father often, bringing him soups and casseroles that he would only pick at. The library had become his entire world. He seemed to be shrinking, his large frame diminishing day by day, as if the argument with Sarah had punctured something vital in him. He would sit for hours, staring at the portrait of Lillian that hung over the fireplace, a painting Sarah had done in her 20s, capturing their mother's smile with such life and warmth that it sometimes seemed she might speak. "Have you heard from her, Dad?" Claire asked one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper as she placed a tray of tea on the desk. Arthur didn't look away from the portrait. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, were a map of blue veins and thin, papery skin. "No," he said, the word final. "She made her choice. But she's your daughter," Claire pleaded, the steam from the tea curling between them like a ghost. "And she will always be my daughter," he replied, his voice gruff. "But she has to be the one to come back. I will not be manipulated by a tantrum." It wasn't a tantrum, Claire wanted to scream. It was a heartbreaking. But she said nothing. She just smoothed her apron and went to dust surfaces that were already clean, the scent of lemon polish doing little to mask the scent of sorrow. Sarah, in her studio on the other side of town, was using her anger as fuel. The converted garage was chaotic, a beautiful mess of stretched canvases, jars bristling with brushes, and tubes of paint squeezed into wild, colorful shapes. The air was thick with the sharp, familiar smells of turpentine and linseed oil. She worked with a frantic, desperate energy, slashing color onto large canvases, dark, tumultuous seascapes and abstract figures that were twisted in pain. The 20%, which she had initially sworn to refuse, had been deposited into her account by the relentlessly efficient Mr. Sterling. She hated it. She hated the necessity of it. But the rent was due, and art supplies weren't free. Every time she used her debit card, she felt a fresh wave of shame and fury. Her friends told her she was being stubborn. "Take the money and run, Sarah. Who cares?" they'd say. But they didn't understand. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about a lifetime of being measured and found wanting. It was about her father's eyes, cold and dismissive, as he said the word art like it was a synonym for failure. The money was the physical manifestation of that judgment. She spent her days in a furious, creative frenzy and her nights lying awake, the memory of the slammed door echoing in her mind, a sound she feared she would never be able to unhear. The first crack in the icy stalemate came from an unexpected place. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Claire, unable to bear the silence in her own home any longer, had gone to the Finch house to do a deep clean of her mother's sitting room, a task she had been putting off for months. The room was a time capsule, preserved exactly as Lillian had left it. The air was sweet with the faint, lingering scent of her perfume, Joy, a scent that could still bring Claire to tears. She started with the bookshelves, dusting each porcelain figurine, a ballerina, a little shepherd boy, a delicate fawn. Her hands were gentle, reverent. It was when she was carefully moving a large, leather-bound family Bible from the bottom shelf that she saw it. Tucked behind it, almost completely hidden, was a small, hinged box she had never seen before. It was made of a dark, polished wood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in a delicate floral pattern. It was locked. A faint prickle of curiosity ran up her spine. Her mother was not a secretive woman. What could this be? She tried the small, brass keyhole, but it was firmly shut. She searched the shelf, the drawer of the nearby writing desk, but found no key. The box itself was light, and when she shook it gently, it made a soft, rustling, papery sound. It wasn't the sound of jewelry. It was the sound of secrets. Claire's heart began to beat a little faster. She carried the box out of the sitting room and into the library, where her father was dozing in his chair. "Dad," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He stirred, blinking his eyes open. What is it, Claire?" "Did you know about this?" she asked, holding out the box. "I found it behind the Bible in Mom's sitting room." Arthur squinted, adjusting his glasses. He stared at the box for a long moment, and a strange, unreadable expression crossed his face, a flicker of recognition, followed by something that looked like unease. "That old thing," he murmured. "I'd forgotten all about it. Your mother's. From before we were married. A keepsake box, I think. She never kept it locked." "But it is locked," Claire said, her fingers tracing the smooth mother-of-pearl. "Do you know where the key is?" Arthur was silent for a beat too long. "No," he said, his voice firm. He shifted in his chair, turning his gaze back towards the window. "It's probably just old letters, birthday cards. Nothing important. Best to leave it be, Claire. Let sleeping dogs lie." His dismissal was too quick, too final. A lifetime of being the obedient daughter warred with the sudden, intense conviction that this box mattered. That her mother had wanted it hidden for a reason. Claire looked from the box to her father's rigid profile, and for the first time in her life, she deliberately chose to disobey him. "Okay," she said lightly, her voice a careful mask of acquiescence. "I'll just put it back then." She left the library, but she did not return to the sitting room. Instead, she took the box into the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She rummaged through the junk drawer, past tangled balls of string and dead batteries, until she found a small paperclip. With a pounding heart, she straightened it and, with painstaking care, began to work the tip into the tiny lock. She was no safecracker, but the lock was old and simple. After a few minutes of jiggling and probing, she felt a faint click. The lid sprang open. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stacks of cash. There was only a single, yellowed envelope, folded in half. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind used for formal correspondence. It was addressed to Lillian Rose Gallagher. Claire's breath caught. Gallagher was her mother's maiden name. This was from before she was Lillian Finch. With trembling fingers, Claire unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, but with a masculine strength to it. It was not her father's blunt, blocky script. The date at the top was June 12, 1965. A year before her parents were married. She began to read. My dearest Lillian. By the time you read this, I will be gone. The train leaves for basic training at dawn, and I cannot, will not, put you through the agony of a goodbye. Watching you cry would break a resolve that is already hanging by the thinnest of threads. I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you laughing by the lake, your hair catching the sun like fire. You are my everything. And that is why I have to let you go. This war, no one knows what it will bring. I cannot ask you to wait for me, to tie your beautiful, young life to the uncertainty of a soldier who might not come back, or who might come back broken. You deserve a life of certainty, of safety, of peace. You deserve a man who can build you a world, not one who might have to leave it in ruins. I have seen the way Arthur Finch looks at you. He is a good man. A solid man. He comes from money and standing, and he can give you the stable, comfortable life I never could. He will never have to leave you. He will never have to make you fear a telegram. So, I am setting you free. Do not wait for me. Do not write to me. Let your heart move on. Marry Arthur. Be happy. That is the only thing that will give me any peace, wherever I am. Please, never doubt that this is the hardest thing I will ever do. It is because I love you more than my own life that I am walking away from it. All my love, forever. Patrick. Claire sank onto a kitchen chair, the letter fluttering from her fingers onto the checkered tablecloth. The world tilted on its axis. Patrick. She had never heard that name. Her mother had never, ever spoken of a Patrick. The air in the kitchen, usually warm and smelling of coffee and cleaning products, felt thin and strange. This was a secret. A monumental one. Her mother, the bedrock of their family, the picture of contentment and devotion, had been in love with another man. A man who had loved her so desperately he had walked away to give her a safer, better life. And Arthur knew. His reaction to the box proved it. He knew about Patrick. This changed everything. The foundation of their family, the story they had all been told and had believed their entire lives, that Arthur and Lillian were a love match, a partnership built on mutual affection and shared goals, was a lie. Or, at the very least, it was a story built on a sacrifice so immense it was staggering. Claire looked at the letter, then towards the library where her father sat. The money, the fight, Sarah's rage, it all seemed so small, so petty, in the shadow of this decades-old secret. This was the real legacy. Not the money. This. She knew what she had to do. She had to show this to Sarah. The drive to Sarah's studio felt like a journey into another country, one Claire had only heard about in whispered, cautionary tales. She navigated through the tidy, tree-lined streets of her own neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and two-car garages, and into a part of town where the buildings were older, the fences were chain-link, and vibrant murals battled for space with faded graffiti. She found the address, a small, slightly dilapidated bungalow with a detached garage whose large window was spattered with a kaleidoscope of paint. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against her ribs. She hadn't called ahead. She was too afraid Sarah would hang up on her. She parked her sensible sedan on the street, the letter clutched in her sweaty hand. The air here smelled different, of damp earth, fried food from a nearby restaurant, and the unmistakable, acrid scent of turpentine. She walked up the cracked concrete path, her footsteps hesitant. Through the garage window, she could see Sarah, her back to the door, standing before a massive canvas. She was wearing a paint-splattered smock, and her hair was a wild mane tied up in a messy bun. She was slashing at the canvas with a palette knife, her movements sharp and angry. The painting was a storm of dark blues and angry reds, a chaotic, beautiful mess of emotion. Claire took a deep breath and knocked softly on the garage door. Sarah flinched, the palette knife halting mid-air. She turned slowly, her face a mask of surprise that quickly hardened into cold suspicion when she saw her sister. She didn't speak, just stood there, waiting. Sarah, Claire began, her voice trembling. I know you don't want to see me. I found something. At the house. In Mom's old sitting room. Sarah's eyes flickered with a faint curiosity, but she didn't move. And you drove all the way over here to tell me that? What is it, a winning lottery ticket? Because I think we've had enough discussions about money to last a lifetime. It's not about money, Claire said, her voice gaining a little strength. She held up the folded letter. It's a letter. To Mom. From a man named Patrick. From before she married Dad. That got a reaction. Sarah's defensive posture slackened just a fraction. She wiped her hands on a rag, her eyes fixed on the yellowed paper. Patrick? Who's Patrick? Just read it, Claire pleaded, taking a step forward and holding it out. Please. It changes everything. Sarah hesitated for a long moment, her pride warring with a deeper, more powerful need to understand the hidden currents of their family. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to deflate her, she walked over and took the letter. She unfolded it, her paint-stained fingers a stark contrast to the fragile paper. Claire watched her sister's face as she read. She saw the initial skepticism, then the dawning comprehension, then a slow, profound shock that drained the anger from her features, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable astonishment. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. When she finished, she read it again, her eyes scanning the words as if she couldn't believe them. She loved someone else, Sarah whispered, the words barely audible. He left her. To give her a better life. She looked up at Claire, her eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. And Dad knew. All this time, he knew. Claire nodded, tears now streaming freely down her own face. I think so. His reaction when I showed him the box, he knew. This whole time, our family, their marriage, it was built on this. On this other man's sacrifice. The two sisters stood in the chaotic, paint-scented silence of the studio, the gulf between them suddenly bridged by this shared, staggering truth. The fight over the inheritance, the percentages, the bitter words, it all seemed to melt away, exposed as the superficial squabble it was in the face of this foundational secret. So all of it, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, the way Dad was always so, controlled. The way he never seemed truly, wildly happy. It wasn't just his personality. It was this. He was living in the shadow of a ghost. A ghost who was a better man than he could ever be. He loved her, Sarah, Claire said softly. In his own way, he did. He built a life with her. He gave her a home, a family. But he knew he was her second choice. Sarah's voice rose, but this time it was not with anger at her sister, but with a fierce, protective grief for her mother. He knew her heart belonged to someone else. No wonder he was so hard. No wonder he valued money and stability above everything else. They were his weapons. They were the only way he could compete with a memory. She looked around her studio, at the vibrant, emotional chaos of her work, and then back at the letter. And Mom, all those times she'd get quiet and look out the window? I thought she was just thoughtful. She was thinking of him. She was living the life he wanted for her, but her heart was always with him. For the first time in weeks, the sisters looked at each other not as adversaries, but as allies, bound by a shared loss and a newfound understanding. The silence between them was no longer hostile, but contemplative, filled with the echoes of a love story they had never known. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice small. We have to show Michael, Claire said. And we have to talk to Dad. We can't pretend we don't know. This is the real inheritance, Sarah. Not the money. This truth. Sarah nodded slowly. The fight had gone out of her. The letter had accomplished what no amount of pleading or arguing ever could, it had humbled her. It had put their petty conflict into a perspective so vast it was almost unbearable. Okay, she said, her shoulders slumping in resignation. Okay. Let's go see Michael. Michael's office was a temple to modern efficiency, all gleaming glass, polished steel, and the hushed hum of central air conditioning. It smelled of coffee, expensive aftershave, and the faint, ozone tang of electronics. When his secretary announced that his sisters were here to see him, his first instinct was irritation. He was in the middle of reviewing a complex merger agreement, and the last thing he needed was a rehash of the family drama. But when Claire and Sarah walked in, he knew immediately that this was different. They weren't here to fight. They stood together, a united front, their faces pale and serious. Sarah, in her paint-stained jeans, looked profoundly out of place, but there was a gravity in her eyes that he had never seen before. Claire's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. Michael, Claire began, her voice quiet but firm. We need to talk. It's about Mom and Dad. Michael leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers. If this is about the inheritance again, Sarah, my position hasn't changed. The documents are. It's not about the money, Sarah interrupted, her voice surprisingly calm. She stepped forward and placed the yellowed letter on his immaculate glass desk. Read this. Michael looked from the letter to his sisters' faces, his lawyer's mind immediately suspicious. What is this? Just read it, Michael, Claire pleaded. Please. With a sigh of exasperation, he picked up the letter. He adjusted his reading glasses, his expression one of bored tolerance. But as his eyes scanned the elegant script, that tolerance evaporated. His jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek began to twitch. He read it once, then again, more slowly, his face growing paler with each passing second. The confident, commanding aura he always carried seemed to leach out of him, leaving behind a stunned, middle-aged man. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide with disbelief. "Patrick," he whispered. "Who the hell is Patrick?" "A man Mom loved before Dad," Sarah said softly. "A man who loved her enough to let her go so she could have a safe, comfortable life with a solid man. With Dad." Michael shook his head, as if trying to physically dislodge the information. This is impossible. Mom and Dad, they were..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The image of his parents he had carried his entire life, a partnership of mutual respect and quiet affection, was crumbling before his eyes. "Dad knew?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We think so," Claire said. "He recognized the box. He told me to leave it alone." A long, heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant whir of a printer from the hallway. Michael took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. The implications were crashing down on him with the force of a tidal wave. His father's relentless drive for success, his obsession with financial security, his sometimes cold demeanor, it all made a terrible, new sense. He hadn't been building a legacy out of pride, he had been building a fortress. A fortress to prove he was worthy of the woman another man had sacrificed for. A fortress to keep the ghost of Patrick at bay. "And the money," Michael said, almost to himself. "The division." He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, there was no condescension in his gaze, only a dawning, horrified understanding. He was trying to protect the legacy. The only thing he felt he could truly offer. Stability. Security. He was punishing you for not valuing the very thing that defined his entire life's purpose. Sarah nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He was trying to prove to a ghost that he was the better man. And he used us to do it. The three siblings sat in the devastating quiet, the air in the sterile office now charged with the raw, unvarnished truth of their parents' lives. The battle they had been fighting was not their own, it was the final, bitter skirmish in a war that had begun long before they were born. "We have to go see him," Michael said, his voice firm with a new resolve. The lawyer was gone, replaced by the son. "Together. We have to give this back to him." He picked up the letter, this fragile piece of paper that held the power to shatter and, perhaps, to heal. The drive back to the house on Elm Street was made in a heavy, contemplative silence. The autumn landscape, once a backdrop to their anger, now seemed appropriately somber, a world stripped bare. They parked and walked to the front door, a trio once divided, now united by a secret they were about to unveil. Eleanor, the longtime housekeeper, let them in, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of all three of them together. "Your father is in the library," she said softly. "He's been in there all day." They found him as they had left him weeks before, seated in his leather chair, but he seemed smaller now, more diminished, as if the pretense of strength had become too heavy to bear. He looked up as they entered, his eyes flickering with surprise and a flicker of something else, anxiety. "Children," he said, his voice rough. "To what do I owe this gathering?" Michael stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply placed the letter on the desk in front of his father, the mother-of-pearl box beside it. Arthur's eyes dropped to the desk. The moment he saw the box and the unfolded letter, all the color drained from his face. He didn't need to read it. He knew what it was. A long, slow, shuddering breath escaped him, and he seemed to collapse in on himself, the last of his defenses crumbling into dust. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the edge of the paper, as if touching a live wire. "Where did you find this?" he whispered, not looking at them. "In Mom's sitting room," Claire said gently. "Behind the Bible." Arthur was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the handwriting he must have recognized instantly. The room was so quiet they could hear the soft, ragged sound of his breathing. "Patrick," he finally said, the name a ghost in the room. His name was Patrick O'Connell. He looked up, and his eyes were ancient, filled with a pain he had carried for over 50 years. He was the love of her life. The confession hung in the air, a simple, devastating sentence that changed everything. Arthur Finch, the unshakable patriarch, was finally, fully, exposed. "He gave her this letter the night before he shipped out to Vietnam," Arthur continued, his voice a low, rusty monotone, as if he were reciting a story he had told himself 1,000 times in the dark of night. "She was devastated. She didn't know what to do. She showed it to me a week later. She was lost." He paused, his fingers still tracing the edge of the paper. "I had loved her from afar for years. She was the most beautiful, vibrant creature I had ever seen. When she showed me that letter, a part of me was horrified. But another part, a selfish, desperate part, saw my chance. I told her Patrick was right. I told her I could give her the life he wanted for her. A safe life. A comfortable life. I promised her I would never leave her, never make her afraid." He finally looked at his children, and the raw honesty in his eyes was almost too much to bear. It wasn't a grand romance. Not at first. For her, it was a practical decision, born of heartbreak. For me, it was the fulfillment of a dream. I spent every day of our marriage trying to be enough. Trying to be the man he told her to marry. I built this business, this house, this fortune, not just for us, but for him. To prove to his ghost that his sacrifice was worth it. That I was worth it. Sarah felt her own anger towards her father dissolve, replaced by a crushing wave of pity. "Oh, Dad," she breathed. "Did she ever get over him?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Arthur gave a sad, slow shake of his head. "No. I don't think she ever did. She loved me, in her way. We built a good life. We had you three. She was a wonderful mother, a devoted wife. But there was always a part of her that was his. A quietness that would come over her sometimes. She'd look out the window, and I knew she was thinking of him. I could never reach her in those moments. No amount of money, no big house, no social standing could ever compete with a memory like that." He looked directly at Sarah. "That's why I was so hard on you, Sarah. Your art, your freedom, your refusal to be practical, it terrified me. It was everything I had spent my life fighting against. It was the specter of a life built on passion and risk, the kind of life Patrick represented. I saw his spirit in you, and I tried to stamp it out. I was wrong. I was so wrong." He turned his gaze to Michael. "And you, Michael? I pushed you so hard into the business, into being the heir, because I needed someone to carry on the fortress. I needed someone to prove that my way, the safe way, was the right way. I burdened you with a legacy that was born from my own insecurity." Finally, he looked at Claire. "And you, my dear Claire? You were the heart, just like your mother. I gave you less responsibility with the money not because I trusted you less, but because I wanted to protect you from the coldness of it all. I wanted you to have the peace that your mother always seemed to be searching for." Tears were streaming down all their faces now. The intricate web of their family dynamics, all the slights and favoritism and misunderstandings, were laid bare, explained not by a lack of love, but by a love that was forever haunted. "What happened to him?" Michael asked quietly. "To Patrick?" Arthur's shoulders slumped. "He came back. In 1972. He looked her up." The children stared, stunned. "She met him for coffee. She told me about it that night. She said he was quiet, hardened by the war. He asked her if she was happy. She told him she was. She told him about the three of you. He just nodded, and he said, 'I'm glad, Lily. I'm glad he kept his promise.' She never saw him again after that. We never spoke of it." The story was complete. The full, tragic arc of their parents' lives was finally visible. The silence that followed was no longer filled with tension, but with a shared, profound grief for the two people at the center of it all, Lillian, who lived a good life with a hole in her heart, and Arthur, who spent his life trying to fill it with everything but the one thing that could have, the truth of his own, unconditional worth. Arthur looked at the three of them, his children, standing together in the lamplight. "The money," he said, his voice breaking. "The division, it was the last act of a foolish old man trying to control a world he never understood. It was the final, desperate brick in a wall I should never have built. I am so sorry. To all of you." He reached into his desk drawer, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a new set of papers. He laid them on the desk next to Patrick's letter. "I had Mr. Sterling draw these up yesterday. I haven't signed them yet. It divides everything equally. 33.3% each. No more, no less." He looked at his children, his eyes begging for a forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. "The money is yours. Do with it what you will. But please, don't let my mistakes be the thing that defines this family after I'm gone. Don't let a ghost and a fortress be your inheritance." It was Sarah who moved first. She walked around the desk, not to look at the new documents, but to kneel beside her father's chair. She took his old, trembling hand in her own paint-stained ones. "The money doesn't matter, Dad," she said, her voice thick with tears. "This," she gestured to the letter, "to the three of them, this is what matters. The truth matters." Claire came and knelt on his other side, resting her head on his shoulder. "We love you, Dad." Michael, standing before the desk, looked at the two documents side by side, the old, yellowed letter that spoke of a love lost, and the new, crisp papers that spoke of a future to be built. He picked up the new documents, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore them in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter into the wastebasket beside the desk. "We don't need a new contract, Dad," he said, his voice strong and clear. "We're a family. We'll figure it out. Together." Arthur Finch looked at his three children, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the green lamp, united not by wealth or duty, but by a shared, painful, and ultimately healing truth. He pulled Sarah and Claire closer, and reached out his hand to Michael, who took it firmly. For the first time in 50 years, the ghost in the room was not a threat, but a quiet witness to a family finally finding its way home. The fortress walls had crumbled, and in the rubble, something new and fragile and beautiful was